morning. Hey, we're only 2 weeks out, guys. Isn't it exciting? 2 weeks from celebrating 40 years on the Hill. I was thinking about what I could say about the finances. I don't know if you all had a chance to listen to Mr. Larrick's recording that Steve has in the connection points. But he goes through a lot of the financial struggles that we actually went through. And spells them out very well. So I would refer you back to that, to listen to that if you haven't already. But I thought it was interesting that Dan Doman and I were talking after the Seder meal, and Betsy Evans was there at the Seder meal, and she was remembering coming up on top of the hill and planting trees when she was in the youth group. That was in '75 when the property was donated to this church. Debbie was here as Christian Education Director. I came along with her, and we did some of the youth work. And so we planted trees on this reclaimed land all over the place. And so I think it's interesting when you stop and think about some young life and how it was impacted. Her dad was Dr. Ross Evans, who was the pastor there at that time. And Dr. Evans, I think, had the first vision of what could be done upon this hill. And we spent opportunities up here with sunrise services, I can remember. And the interesting thing about it, Steve, we were right out there just where you were. And to reflect back on that 40 years ago is kind of a neat process. But I wanted to tell you a little bit more about some of the other things that took place. I can remember the night that the vote actually took place where we were going to actually make a move. There had been some other work done as to whether we were going to go back and maybe remodel the church because there wasn't enough parking and it was 4 stories. So, they thought, well, even after we get finished with the remodeling, we still have an old church. So it was thought of that maybe we could build upon this property. And that idea and that dream grew. And so as God continued to work and form that in the minds of people, it came to the night of the vote. And unfortunately, there was 2 sides of that issue. But I'll never forget, and I know others in the room remember the vote and different people speaking. But to me, it was the message that Emerson Smith, and many of you don't even remember Emerson Smith, but Emerson was probably in his 70s then, because I remember he hired me to be a State Farm agent here in Beckley when I was still in college. And he retired in '75 when I started. So I know that at that point he had to be in his 70s. But when Emerson rose that night and spoke, he penetrated the minds and hearts of those people that were at that meeting. Because he was saying, as many had said before, that yes, the church that we are in on South Canoa Street will serve me, but that's not what the church does. The church is about building into the future, into the work that's going to be coming behind us, like Betsy Evans, who is now serving at Beckley Community Church. So that vote passed that night, and then we started getting bids in to build the church. And I think that Sid reflected on it was $1.7 million. Well, if you remember this story about the Red Sea, and when you're coming up against that, and the only way things are going to move beyond that point if God intervenes. It was one of those moments where you realized that this is far more than what man can do. We were talking about interest rates in 14 and 16% interest range. That is a big number and unheard of even thinking about today. But the message penetrated, and as God opened that vision up to us, you could see his hand working. We broke off in teams. We were assigned different teams on what work you would do to go out and do visitation. I was part of the advanced team that went out and would speak to people that they thought may have opportunity to give larger gifts. My partner was Danny Warren. Now, a lot of you don't remember Danny, some of you do. But Danny ran the Warren Oil Company here in Beckley for years, Warrenizing dry cleaners. And Danny always reminded me of Danny Kaye. He sort of had that same look. But he was a real character. And Danny would always say we would meet and we would go out 2 or 3 times a week and make these visitations. And he'd always say to Bill, I need you to pray. I don't mind talking about the money, and I don't mind asking people for money, but he said, I need you to pray. Well, we would pray before we would go in. And as Danny would sense that the meeting was coming to a close, he would stop and say, Bill, why don't you just close it in prayer right now? And so we had a great relationship, and some of those opportunities to meet and share with those people are priceless. The things I learned through that process are unbelievable. But right now, today, we stand on those shoulders of those people that made this possible. This is God's house. This is his handiwork. There were many, many people that participated in providing whatever they had to make this house possible. And I think as we reflect back over those 40 years, let's try and remember some of those folks the best we can, or ask people who were there who they were. Because they gave, they sacrificed, so we have what we have today to celebrate on this hill. It's God's house and his house of prayer. I don't know what the next 40 years holds, but I do know as I look out there, it'll hold ministry for all of us. And as long as we can claim that Jesus is Lord, there'll be ministry on the hill. Let it be so. Amen.